The operational reality within the Strait of Hormuz has fundamentally shifted over the past 72 hours. This was not a gradual diplomatic realignment. It was a calculated, synchronized demonstration of strategic force. A resurgent great power elected to provide absolute, full spectrum backing to a regional partner at the exact moment that partner moved to secure the most critical energy transit corridor on the globe. From the Kremlin, the Russian executive issued a formal public directive confirming complete support for Iranian sovereignty and its regional security initiatives. The statement contains zero diplomatic ambiguity. Exactly 6 hours following that broadcast, the Iranian Revolutionary Guard Corps initiated a massive, coordinated kinetic event. A strike package consisting of 1,200 ballistic and cruise missiles was launched simultaneously. The targeting matrix encompassed every commercial and naval vessel within the Strait of Hormuz, the coastal infrastructure supporting maritime logistics, and, most critically, the American carrier strike group positioned in the Gulf of Oman. The USS Gerald R. is the most technologically sophisticated and resource-intensive maritime platform ever constructed. It was deployed specifically to establish deterrence against this exact scenario. It absorbed multiple direct missile impacts. The vessel is currently non-operational as a combat asset. Initial damage assessments from naval engineers indicate that the required structural repairs will necessitate dry dock facilities for a period measured in years, not months. In Tel Aviv, the Israeli defense establishment monitored the systematic degradation of American naval architecture in real time. They are now processing a strategic baseline that their entire national defense doctrine was designed to prevent. The American carrier presence has been neutralized. The implicit umbrella of offshore air superiority is gone. The logistical resupply corridors routed through the Strait of Hormuz are severed. Consequently, the state is operating under a level of geographical and military isolation unseen since its foundational period. The term abandonment is not utilized here as political rhetoric. It is the precise operational definition of Israel's current geographic and strategic reality. Washington did not willingly forfeit its regional partner. It was systematically forced through external military pressure to accept an outcome it lacked the immediate capacity to prevent. The subsequent analysis will bypass standard political commentary to examine the raw operational data. We will deconstruct how a 1,200 weapon strike package successfully penetrated the layered defensive architecture of a carrier strike group engineered specifically to survive such an engagement. We will evaluate the global implications for American maritime force projection now that the Ford is effectively eliminated from the theater. We will examine the strategic calculus behind the Russian executive's timing, analyzing how Moscow extracts direct geopolitical dividends from an incapacitated American strike group in the Gulf. We will unpack the force paralysis in Washington, detailing why the available choices strictly oscillate between a high-risk escalation against a nuclear peer and a strategic withdrawal that forfeits regional influence. Finally, we will project the incoming structure of the Middle East. We will map the new operational parameters of an international order where American carrier dominance has been empirically defeated. To comprehend the strategic shift that occurred in the Gulf of Oman, one must first deconstruct the operational mechanics of the strike. From a professional military standpoint, the engagement executed against the carrier strike group represents the most sophisticated anti-access and area denial campaign ever conducted against a highly defended, high-value naval target. This was not a desperate maximum volume salvo hoping to achieve a statistically lucky impact. It was a meticulously planned, multi-axis layered strike architecture. The objective was to systematically overwhelm every single defensive tier of the carrier strike group through precise sequencing, target saturation, decoy employment, and terminal phase maneuvering that current interceptor systems simply could not mathematically counter. The strike package was organized into 5 distinct waves. Each wave was assigned a specific tactical objective within the broader operational design. The first wave consisted of approximately 300 older generation anti-ship cruise missiles, including indigenous subsonic systems. They were launched from coastal positions along the northern shore of the strait. These initial weapons were relatively easy to detect. They flew within the standard engagement envelope of the carrier group's primary defensive interceptors. However, their operational purpose was not to penetrate the defense and strike the hull. Their strict purpose was to force the defending systems to reveal their radar positions, to expend initial interceptor inventories, and to establish defensive firing patterns that could be analyzed by the attacking force in real time. 20 minutes after the initial launch, the second wave was initiated. Approximately 250 weapons introduced a significantly more complex threat profile. This wave combined regional cruise missiles with initial tranche Russian cruise systems flying at highly mixed altitudes and terminal speeds. The design was to intentionally complicate the fire control solutions for the defending escort cruisers. Some weapons flew high and fast to draw defensive radar attention upward. Others executed sea-skimming flight profiles, utilizing the radar clutter from the ocean surface to mask their approach until they breached the horizon line, the exact point where defensive intercept time compresses to mere seconds. The defending Aegis combat system was now forced to process target streams from multiple geographic vectors simultaneously. The third wave served as the operational inflection point. Approximately 400 ballistic and cruise missiles were launched in a highly compressed time window, utilizing specific flight trajectories designed to ensure they arrived over the target area at the exact same moment. This synchronized arrival created the ultimate saturation condition that every anti-access doctrine aims to achieve. It presented more simultaneous incoming threats than the defending system possessed ready interceptors in its vertical launch tubes. The engagement geometry compressed the defensive decision cycle to a point where human operators could no longer maintain effective manual control. Automated defensive systems were forced to begin making engagement priority calculations, a mathematical reality that inevitably allows a specific percentage of the incoming threat matrix to penetrate unengaged. With the defensive architecture structurally degraded and significantly depleted of interceptors, the fourth wave was launched. This wave introduced the weapons that ultimately achieved the mission kill status on the primary target. Approximately 150 hypersonic anti-ship missiles, comprising both indigenous regional designs and advanced Russian systems, entered the operational theater. These weapons travel at terminal velocities between Mach 8 and Mach 9. They execute unpredictable non-ballistic maneuvers in the final seconds of flight. They present an engagement problem that the most capable anti-air interceptors in the current naval inventory are only marginally capable of addressing under perfect ideal conditions. Under the degraded, saturated conditions created by the first three waves, the defensive batteries achieved intercept rates drastically below the threshold required to prevent penetration. The damage sustained by the carrier explicitly reflects the unique characteristics of hypersonic kinetic impacts. The primary flight deck absorbed at least 3 confirmed strikes. The kinetic energy generated by an object striking at Mach 8 is entirely sufficient to defeat structural hardening and compromise the deck architecture, even preceding warhead detonation. The resulting structural craters immediately rendered the electromagnetic catapult systems completely inoperable, permanently arresting the platform's ability to conduct fixed-wing flight operations. Ruptured aviation fuel lines triggered secondary internal fires, requiring massive containment efforts by damage control teams. Finally, a fifth wave of approximately 100 hypersonic weapons, initially held in strategic reserve, was employed. These final weapons were directed against specific targets identified during the real-time execution of the first 4 waves. This execution sequence demonstrated a level of real-time battle management, airspace deconfliction, and strike coordination that reflects genuine operational sophistication. The mission planning software required to synchronize 1,200 weapons across 5 distinct waves against a maneuvering naval target is not developed rapidly. The operator training required to effectively deploy Russian-supplied hypersonic systems is not acquired in isolation. The engagement in the Strait was the empirical result of a strategic integration that had been systematically constructed over years, waiting for the precise moment when its demonstration would yield the maximum geopolitical return. Understanding why the Russian executive chose this precise moment to provide explicit backing to an Iranian operation requires examining the evolution of Russian strategic doctrine. From Moscow's perspective, the fundamental driver of foreign policy since the geopolitical realignments of the 1990s has been the assessment that the United States will not accommodate Russia as a legitimate great power. Every subsequent geopolitical interaction has reinforced this internal conviction. Consequently, the Russian strategic posture prioritizes building the capacity to impose costs on American force projection that exceed what Washington is politically willing to pay. The Iranian relationship is central to this architecture. Iran occupies geographic territory bordering the Strait of Hormuz, a critical maritime choke point processing 20% of the global daily oil trade. Furthermore, its expanding arsenal presents an anti-access threat that permanently complicates American naval operations in the region. The explicit public statement from the Kremlin tying Russian national interests directly to Iranian security was not a rhetorical flourish. It was a deliberate, calculated deterrent signal. It forced American military planners to recognize that a sustained air campaign against Iranian infrastructure would trigger Russian countermeasures. While the exact nature of those countermeasures remained intentionally ambiguous, the threat successfully forced Washington to account for the possibility of direct Russian military involvement. The timing of the strike exploited a specific window of American strategic vulnerability. American forces are currently deployed in support of operations across multiple simultaneous theaters, and the defense industrial base is struggling to sustain the high munitions consumption rates generated by these ongoing conflicts. Additionally, the domestic political environment is heavily fractured over the extent of continued global engagement. In this environment, the threshold for escalating into a broader conflict is severely constrained. For Moscow, the operational result validates the strategic logic. American carrier aviation, the primary instrument of offensive power projection in the Middle East, has been effectively withdrawn from the theater. The international community has received an empirical demonstration that American naval dominance is no longer uncontested. Conversely, for Washington, the strike against the carrier group has generated a strategic problem possessing no viable solution. The executive branch is forced to choose between two different categories of severe operational defeat, each carrying consequences that alter the global order. The escalation pathway involves executing direct military strikes against Iranian launch sites, command nodes, and logistical infrastructure. While this preserves immediate institutional credibility, demonstrating that attacks on American assets carry heavy consequences, the kinetic and economic costs are unmanageable. A sustained air campaign would require thousands of continuous sorties operating within a highly capable integrated air defense network. This network combines Russian-supplied systems with indigenous developments, such as the Bavar 373, ensuring steady aircraft attrition rates even for advanced stealth platforms like the F-22 and F-35. Furthermore, Iranian retaliation would guarantee the complete, sustained closure of the Strait of Hormuz. Economic modeling indicates global oil prices would rapidly exceed $200 per barrel, inducing a severe shock to the global economy within weeks. Crucially, this pathway carries the terminal risk of drawing Russian military into a direct, uncontrollable escalation cycle with the United States. The alternative pathway is strategic disengagement. This involves accepting the effective loss of the carrier platform as the price paid for avoiding a wider regional war, followed by a systemic drawdown of American forward presence. The immediate consequence of this choice is the operational abandonment of Israel. Without American carrier aviation projecting strike capability, the Israeli defense establishment confronts a threat matrix it cannot manage through its independent resources alone. The secondary consequence is a systemic collapse of American alliance credibility globally. If Washington will not sustain its forward presence to protect its closest regional partner under direct military risk, the inherent value of American security guarantees evaporates for allied nations worldwide. The current paralysis in Washington is not a result of insufficient military capability. It is the direct result of a domestic political system entirely unprepared to absorb the catastrophic economic consequences of escalation or the terminal geopolitical consequences of strategic disengagement. In Tel Aviv, the strategic planning architecture is currently processing the empirical collapse of its foundational military doctrine. Since 1973, the underlying assumption of the nation's security policy dictated that, regardless of local regional threat matrices, the ultimate survival of the state was permanently underwritten by American military projection. The physical withdrawal of the damaged carrier strike group has officially voided that assumption. This systemic shift is not theoretical. It is immediately quantifiable through observable real-time alterations in the operational posture of the Israel Defense Forces. First, previously planned offensive operations against hostile positions in southern Lebanon have been formally suspended. This suspension is not driven by a lack of tactical necessity. It is driven by a stark recalculation of risk. Executing sustained high-intensity ground operations without the assured backing of American offshore air support presents a risk profile that the current military command assesses as operationally unacceptable. Second, the scheduled demobilization and rotation of reserve units have been halted. Active military personnel are being retained in the field significantly beyond their planned deployment durations. This action establishes a conservative, defensive ground posture designed to mitigate the sudden uncertainty regarding external reinforcement. Third, the established parameters of diplomatic engagement have been rapidly modified. The state has initiated indirect back-channel communications with Moscow. The objective is to assess the specific geopolitical terms required for Russian-mediated de-escalation with Tehran, effectively bypassing traditional Western diplomatic channels. The defense establishment is now forced to calculate state survivability within a permanently degraded threat environment. The operational reality is severe. Iranian precision strike infrastructure possesses the technical capacity to successfully reach and impact any geographic coordinate within Israeli territory. Simultaneously, hostile proxy organizations on the northern border possess both the stockpiles and the institutional will to sustain high-intensity kinetic conflict indefinitely. The offshore American deterrent, historically relied upon to neutralize these specific threats, is no longer positioned to absorb the associated risks. This severe operational isolation inevitably forces an active evaluation of the nuclear dimension. The topic must be addressed with precise analytical care. The state possesses an unacknowledged strategic nuclear arsenal. While never officially declared, its presence has functioned as an open operational reality for 5 decades. This arsenal serves as the ultimate strategic failsafe, the weapon of absolute last resort designed to ensure that no conventional military defeat can translate into existential state termination. However, the operational threshold for nuclear signaling or active employment is extraordinarily high, and the geopolitical consequences of crossing that threshold are entirely irreversible. The immediate calculation being processed by strategic planners is whether a rapidly deteriorating, though not yet existentially catastrophic security environment justifies the severe risks associated with activating the nuclear deterrent framework. Current intelligence modeling suggests that the state has not yet reached that terminal threshold. However, the operational distance to that exact point is mathematically shorter today than at any recorded moment since the conflict of 1973. The calculus of regional survival has been fundamentally rewritten, and the margin for conventional error has been reduced to zero. The current transition marks the definitive conclusion of the American organized security architecture in the Middle East. The emerging operational order is no longer organized around ideological alignment or democratic frameworks. It is dictated strictly by the balance of military capability integrated with geographic position. Iran possesses structural leverage through its geographic proximity to the Strait of Hormuz, maintaining the capacity to interdict transit corridors at will. Russia has established proportional geopolitical influence by demonstrating a willingness to supply advanced capabilities that directly neutralize American strategic preferences. Simultaneously, China is securing expanded regional access by maintaining economic relationships that entirely bypass American sanctioned architectures. Consequently, the Gulf Arab states are currently conducting urgent strategic reviews. The observable outcome is a systemic reduction in their exclusive dependency on American security guarantees, replaced by diversified diplomatic and economic engagement with the Iran-Russia-China alignment. While these states will maintain functional relationships with Washington, American strategic preferences will carry significantly less weight in their operational decision-making than at any point in the preceding 50 years. This systemic realignment fundamentally alters the global energy matrix. If a regional power demonstrates the sustained operational ability to interdict maritime traffic through Hormuz whenever core interests are challenged, the associated risk premium integrated into global oil pricing transitions from temporary to structural. Energy importing economies will be forced to build strategic reserves and accept severe price volatility, establishing constraints on global economic growth for the foreseeable future. For Israel, the available strategic pathways have uniformly degraded. Accommodation mediated by Moscow or Beijing requires concessions on nuclear constraints that no domestic government can politically survive. Sustained confrontation without assured American offshore strike capability ensures operation within a permanently elevated threat environment. Retracting into a purely defensive territorial posture requires abandoning the forward-deployed military strategy that has defined the state's security foundation since 1967. The most significant strategic development is not a single kinetic event, but the cumulative empirical demonstration that American military power possesses definitive operational limits. The Carrier Strike Group was designed to serve as the ultimate unchallengeable asset of American hegemony. The withdrawal of the USS Gerald R. under sustained fire demonstrates that this challenge has succeeded. This specific vulnerability will be analyzed and integrated into the operational planning of every nation currently evaluating its strategic posture relative to American power. The symbol of American naval supremacy, an asset valued at $14 billion and equipped with the most advanced defensive architecture in military history, is actively withdrawing from the Gulf of Oman. Its flight deck is structurally compromised, and its air wing is incapable of conducting operations. It was escorted by cruisers carrying the most sophisticated interceptor inventory available, yet a localized strike package consisting of 1,200 weapons successfully removed it from the order of battle. The era of uncontested American dominance in the region has effectively concluded. The new multipolar equilibrium is currently being established, defined not by diplomatic agreements, but by the raw limits of military technology when confronted by strategic will and geographic advantage. In Washington, the strategic silence remains unbroken as the system processes a reality containing no remaining optimal solutions.